Welcome to Bridge Academy, the History of Computing from Abacus to Artificial Intelligence series. Part 1, The History of Computing, the Sumerian Abacus. Introduction. Thousands of years ago, long before computers, smartphones, or calculators existed, ancient civilizations were already trying to solve the problem of counting and measuring things. This was the beginning of what we now call computing. But computing didn't start with machines made of metal and wires. It started with stones, sand, and clever ideas. The first known tool created by humans to help with calculations was called the abacus. It was a simple but powerful invention. The abacus helped people do basic math like addition and subtraction. It also helped with more complex operations such as multiplication and division. In a world without paper, pens, or numbers as we know them, this tool allowed people to work with quantities in a more organized way, the Sumerian abacus. Historians believe that the Sumerians, a group of people who lived in ancient Mesopotamia, in what is now Iraq, were the first to use an early form of the abacus. The Sumerians lived around 5,000 years ago and are considered one of the world's first advanced civilizations. They built great cities and created one of the earliest writing systems, known as cuneiform. But they also needed ways to count and measure goods, especially in trade, farming, and construction. At that time, their society was growing. Cities were becoming busy centers of trade. Farmers needed to count animals and measure grain. Merchants needed to keep track of what they sold and bought. To do this, people needed a way to calculate numbers accurately and quickly, and so the abacus was born. The word abacus itself comes from the Greek word abax, meaning drawing board. But even earlier, people used smooth surfaces covered in sand or dust to draw lines and place counters. In fact, the Hebrew word abak means dust, showing that this method was common across different regions. People would draw lines in the dust with a stick or even their finger and use small stones to represent numbers. The earliest Sumerian abacus was not like the bead frame version many people know today. Instead, it was a flat surface, like a stone tablet, with lines carved into it. Small objects like pebbles were placed on these lines. Each line represented a different value or place, and the pebbles were moved around to perform calculations. This helped people keep track of quantities without having to rely only on memory. Over time, the idea of using physical objects to represent numbers spread to other cultures. Later, in China, a more advanced version of the abacus was created. This version used beads that slid along rods inside a wooden frame. Objects to represent numbers spread to other cultures. The abacus worked like a visual calculator. It allowed users to see and move numbers physically. This was a huge help, especially in a time before writing numbers became common. Before the Sumerians developed writing, most records were made using marks or small clay tokens. These tokens could represent animals, amounts of grain, or containers of oil. The abacus helped organize this kind of information more clearly. One important thing the Sumerians developed alongside the abacus was a number system. Most people today use a base 10 system, meaning we count in groups of 10. But the Sumerians used something called the sexagesimal system, which is based on 60. This is why we have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. It's a system that has lasted thousands of years, and we still use it in our clocks and angles. Why 60? 60 is a very flexible number because it can be evenly divided by 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. That made it easier for Sumerians to divide up goods, measure time, and keep track of land. Their clever number system made their abacus even more powerful. They could calculate large numbers, split things fairly, and maintain accurate records. The Sumerians didn't stop there. As their society became more complex, they started using symbols to represent groups of objects. This made their writing and mathematics more efficient. In a way, they were already working on what we now call data representation, a key part of modern computing. They were starting to think in terms of systems, logic, and information processing, just like we do with software and code today. What's truly amazing is that this early computing tool, the abacus, has lasted for thousands of years. Even with all our digital technology, the abacus is still used in many places. In parts of Asia, children are taught to use it to improve mental math skills. Some shopkeepers still use it instead of calculators. That shows just how effective and timeless this tool really is. Summary: Abacus was so important in the history of computing. It was the first tool created to help humans calculate and process information. Abacus didn't need electricity, programming, or screens, but it worked in a way that helped people solve problems, analyze data, and make informed decisions. In fact, the abacus is the ancestor of every computer we use today. It was the very beginning of a long journey from moving stones on a board to AI running on advanced microchips. The story of the abacus reminds us that computing began with people, not machines. Humans have always asked questions, solved problems, and invented tools to help them do it better. The abacus gave ancient people the power to think more clearly, to count more accurately, and to plan with confidence. And that's still what computing is about today, extending our abilities through smart tools. From abacus to algorithms, from dusty counting boards to digital tablets, the history of computing is the story of how humans have always searched for better ways to think, learn, and solve problems. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.